Hi, I'm Daniel Labrosse. I'm very happy to be here today. Um, I've been coming to Siga ever since I was a kid, and this is the first time I'm actually performing here, or performing in like air quotes, I suppose. Um, I guess we don't know each other, so introductions should be in order. Chances are we haven't met yet. And when you meet a new person, the question always comes up, what do you do for a living? That's something that I'm always asked, which should be an illustration right now, not blank screen. Um, it's okay. Um, yeah, the question always comes up what I do for a living. And, I can tell people that I'm a visual artist, that I animate, that I paint. There's all sorts of visual things that I do. But if I could sum up my things in one word, I would say that I draw. I draw for a living. That's my job. That's what I do every day. And it's basically my favorite thing to do. I consider myself very fortunate that I get to draw for a living. Um, and it's something that's always been a part of my life ever since I was a little kid. Some of my earliest memories have to do with drawing. And it's to the point where I kind of think of it as just a part of my daily life. I don't even necessarily think of it as a career. It's like brushing my teeth in the same way that I can't imagine, or I suppose don't want to imagine someone not brushing their teeth every day. I can't imagine someone not drawing every day. Um, and before we continue, I'd like to do like a little survey, because it's apparently a thing that people like to do at TED Talks is do surveys. So it's a little hand raising time. Um, Raise your hand if you ever draw for fun. Is there anybody here who likes to draw for fun? Okay. Okay, that's a bunch of people. That's great. Um, Now, my second question would be, is there any of you who, well, I suppose if you like to draw for fun now, you always have, but have you ever drawn for fun in your whole life? Even if you don't do now, has there ever been a time in your life, even if you were a baby and you picked up a crayon and you were just doing like mindless scribbles without any thought, have you ever drawn for fun in your whole life? Okay, that's most of you. That's awesome. We have a very artistic audience. Um, my last and final question would be, who here among you draws for a living? Is there anybody among you who does that as a job? Okay. Okay, we have one person, it seems like. That number has shrunk quite a lot, and I always found that very interesting because, I always think about why people don't get into the arts as a career more often. It just seems like a no-brainer to me. We always draw ever since we're kids. We do it the same way that we play with toys, the same way that we play with our friends. It's just something that we do all the time. So how come more people don't get into to the arts as a career? That's a question that I ponder very often, and it's something that I got an answer to a few years ago, or I believe I got an answer to it. When I started teaching illustration for the first time, two of my very good friends, Kranis Dodo and Berta Valo, um, the two of us, or three of us rather, started an illustration course, and we found that there was a very wide variety of people that joined our course, right? We had 17-year-old kids, we had 70-year-old adults, we had teenagers and pensioners, we had doctors, we had lawyers, we had like grocery store workers. There was like some guy that was running a pet pharmacy out of his apartment or something like that. We had like a very, very wide range of people that were there. And there was two things in common with them. One of them is that obviously they were at an illustration course, so they all wanted to draw. They all, wanted to express themselves. They all wanted to share their own view of the world with others. And the other thing that united them is the exact opposite, is that they were afraid to fail. They were really, really scared that they would, make art that was bad, that was considered bad by others. And they thought that, they would look stupid for wanting to try this. They thought that it just wouldn't make sense to others. They were all really, really scared to fail. And I think, there's a bunch of reasons why people don't get into the arts. There's economic reasons, social reasons. Not everybody has like the same safety net that they can fall back on. And it is a risky career at the end of the day. But I think this whole thing of why people don't get into the arts as a career more so starts earlier than that in childhood. And it starts with this sort of self-doubt that a lot of people get for whatever reason. it can be personal failures, it can be, personal hardships, it can be doubt from other people around you, and it can be doubt from yourself as well. So I'd like to share some of those stories with you, some of those moments of personal doubt that I had as a child that I kind of tried to turn around, and instead of taking them as hardships or hindrances, I tried to turn them into challenges to overcome and sort of flip them to my own benefit. My first story starts with this beautiful self-portrait that I drew in kindergarten when I was around, I want to say 4 years old or 5 years old or something. This is what I looked like as a child. I had a green body, I had red skin, I had blue eyes, even though they're brown now. I could levitate balls with my mind, and I had spikes all over my head. And most importantly, my hands look like that. That's what my hands look like as a child. It's a very rare condition that happens sometimes with children. That's what mine looked like. And I was just going to town on this portrait, and I was super proud of it. I was very happy with it. As I said earlier, drawing is like my favorite thing to do. Sorry. Um, and, I was very happy with it. I thought this was cool. This was a portrait I was doing, and I was super proud of it. And then a teacher comes up behind me, kindergarten teacher, and she says, "What are you doing?" And I say, I'm drawing a self-portrait. What does it look like? Um, she says, "No, that's not right, because the hand that you're drawing has 7 fingers, and if you look at your hand, you look at a human hand, it has 5 fingers. So that means that you can't draw." Which was, a loaded thing to say to a kid, I suppose. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, it's my favorite thing to do, and I just can't do it? Like, I'm bad at it now? I went home to my mom, and I told her this story, and I don't really remember her face or her expression at the time. I imagine it wasn't very happy that a kindergarten teacher would say something like that to a kid. But she told me, if that's what your hand looks like, if that's how you perceive the world, and you're happy with it, then you should just keep going with it. If it brings you joy, then you should just keep going at it. If that's what hands look like to you, that's how you draw hands. That's how you should keep going. And that's what I did. I've never drawn a hand with 5 fingers since then. It's my tiny little act of rebellion against the school system, I suppose. My next story has to do with my handwriting. It also has to do with the school system. I don't know if this is exactly the way it is everywhere in the world, but here in Hungary, in the mid-aughts, I hate saying the aughts, in the mid-2000s, um, we had these sort of lessons where we had to draw in cursive or write in cursive, right? We had to learn how to write in cursive and read in cursive. And this was a few years after kindergarten. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I just couldn't get it down. Like, cursive was just not coming to me. I couldn't read it. I couldn't write it. It was just not clicking. The motor skills weren't there, and my grades started to suffer. So because of that, I was sent to a child psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with like a number of different things. But I was mostly, the most important part is that I was diagnosed with dysgraphia, which is like this condition that affects your handwriting and your ability to, your handwriting image, I suppose. And the other thing I was diagnosed with was ADHD. And the funny thing about that second diagnosis is that when I was an adult, I started suspecting that I have ADHD because there was a lot of things that clued me into that. And I went to see a psychiatrist, and she was asking to see, if I had any papers from my childhood, and I had plenty. So I brought these like childhood diagnostic papers to her, and she was looking through them, and she was like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm here to get diagnosed with ADHD." And she was like, "But you already were diagnosed with ADHD when you were 10 years old." And I just realized, yeah, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and then I forgot, which is like the most ADHD thing that has ever happened to anybody, I think. Anyway, yeah, regarding my handwriting, I was struggling with cursive, like I said, and since we were getting graded about cursive, my grades started to suffer. But I had this thought in the back of my mind that, like, I like the way my handwriting looks. It looks like the comics that I'm reading. It looks like Spider-Man. It looks like Garfield. It looks like all the stuff that I enjoy back at home. So if I enjoy it, and, if there's a bunch of favorite things of mine that look the same, why can't I keep going at it? Um, and so eventually I started working my handwriting into my work. I started, drawing comic books. I started telling stories in my sketchbooks and stuff. Eventually, my handwriting became a very integral part of my work, And now, very often, I get hired on projects because of my handwriting, actually. Um, yeah. And then my third and final story has to do with art class specifically. So art class was not a thing that I enjoyed when I was a kid, which is odd because you would think that I like to do art. It's my favorite thing. There's a whole class dedicated to it. I would be awesome at it. It would be my favorite thing to do because all the other classes I'm drawing anyway. I'm not paying attention to math or history or anything. I'm drawing anyways. So there's a whole class where I get to do that. Isn't that awesome? And it wasn't. It was super boring. I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't even that I couldn't do the exercises, it's that I didn't want to do them. Because if any of you have ADHD or you know anyone with ADHD, you know that it's super hard to get motivated to do something that you're not personally invested in. And that's how I felt. I wasn't interested in doing the exercises where you're asked to draw an apple. I was like, okay, there's an apple, cool. Can it have a body? Can it be a person with an apple head? And I would get really bad grades because of that. I would I wouldn't move forward in class. I would just kind of be, stuck in the same spot. And that went on for a long, long time until my mom took me to a show in the Ludwig Museum. And the Ludwig Museum is like one of the few big contemporary, I think it might actually be the only big contemporary art center we have in the city here. I was taken to the Ludwig, and there was a show there by an artist who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That artist was Keith Haring, who became on the spot my favorite artist of all time. This show just changed my life completely because there was this guy there who was doing things the way that I wanted to do them. His paintings looked like my favorite things. They looked like the cartoons on TV. They looked like, the comics that I was reading. It looked exactly the way that I wanted to do art. And because of that, I started thinking about it differently. I started thinking like, wait, if this guy can do whatever he wants and, he can kick the rules and he can just, paint however he wants to paint, then so can anybody else, I suppose. Without realizing that the guy went to college and studied very hard and, was actually like a very skilled painter. As a child, I had that idea in my head, that this guy was just doing his own thing and he was super successful at it. He was respected as an artist. And all the exhibitions before that I saw, that I was taken to, whether it be school trips or, my family taking me to exhibitions, they were all like landscapes and portraits, and I didn't care about that because I was a little 10-year-old who was into Black Sabbath and horror movies and comic books, and I'm not going to be interested in landscapes and portraits. But Keith Haring was not landscapes and portraits. He was the thing that I wanted to be. And because of that, I decided that I would do this for the rest of my life as a career or as just something I would just keep going. And I think I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't study, and I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't, find certain things that are academic to be of value to you at all. I would never say that. I think if your self-expression would benefit from learning how to, draw anatomy very accurately, shade very realistically, draw perspective very realistically, then by all means go out and study all that stuff. I know that there's many things that I can always improve on in my art, and I always try to. And I think that's the important part, is that, don't conform to the academic rules if they're affecting your sense of joy and your the fun that you're having while creating, because that's, at the end of the day, the most important part in it all. And especially nowadays when, there's so many artists out there, social media is a thing, every artist is on social media. It's very, very hard to stand out from the crowd. There's so much noise out there that I think it's less so about doing something perfectly, but more so doing something in your own way. And if you do something in your own way and you can learn from your hardships and from your challenges over time, and you can evolve that into a style, then I think you're going to be a successful illustrator. Thanks for coming to my talk.